have a policy question for you,
Yes.
sir.
Let's see if he answers it.
I will. Don't worry about it, Marco. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, little Marco. I will.
All right, well, let's hear Big Don. Donald.
Don't worry about it,
All right,
little.
wait.
Don't worry about it, little Marco.
Gentlemen,
Hey,
You ought to chill about
gentlemen, you gotta do better than this.
This guy has the number one
Mr. Trump,
number
may I
one
ask you,
absentee
Mr. Trump,
record in the
I'd like to ask you a
United
policy question.
Doesn't show
Your
up to
proposed
vote.
tax cut.
That's why the
Your
people in
proposed-
Florida do not like him.
Yes, folks. Left Reckoning 194. We've come full circle because Little Marco and Big Don has kind of a swing and a miss there from Little Marco.
Like, I was about to say, like, 100% knew his place the first moment they interacted.
Big Don, and he like laughed at himself about it. Little Marco and Big Don together under the same administration. Marco Rubio will be the leader of the State Department, which is the overt arm of America's foreign policy, the supposedly diplomatic arm, and he's a big-time neocon. So I'll let you go, David, because I got sorry.
Well, no, I mean, we're going to talk more in depth about that a bit later and some of the other Trump appointments, but 100% any kind of fantasy that Trump was going to kind of represent any kind of break with the previous form of politics was wrong. And I think in a lot of ways, much like the first Trump administration, we're about to see a kind of smash and grab version of politics, along with a lot of old school neocon politics. But I will just say, quick note on the Marco thing. One thing to really note there is that this is somebody who wants to continue the American war against the people of Cuba. So desperate and serious need to get very serious about those kind of movements. And hey, it's been great that we've had a Democrat president for the past 4 years that has not wanted to return to the Obama standard of how we relate to our friends in Cuba.
Yeah, I mean, exactly another failing of Biden. Rubio also a big instigator for a coup in Venezuela as well. So, we got a coup monger in chief. And yeah, like Donald Trump Jr. told comic Dave Smith, I guess he's not administration staffer Dave Smith, but he told comic Dave Smith, look, Dave Smith's like good on keeping Pompeo and Nikki Haley out. We got to keep pushing, keep the neocons. And that lasted about 12 hours, I don't know. And we got a bunch of like China Hawk, NSA guy, in addition to, I mean, we're going to talk about this after Jeff Schuhrke today.
Yeah, look, we got a big show. We got a lot of big shows coming up, so we'll get right into it. We're going to have Jeff Schuhrke in just a moment join us. We're going to be talking about how Biden and Harris abandoned the working class, but also get into a little bit of history about some of the issues with the American labor movement and its role in attacking the left during the Red Scare. And there's some very worrying and important corollaries there that we'll be getting into in just a little bit. Matt has a very big sermon ready for us on the way that a certain kind of politics is being used to silence the left and the working class in this country. And we will also certainly be talking about all of these big Trump appointments. Later in the evening, we're going to be joined from Mike from PA in the post game. We're going to be talking about none other than our idol, David Pakman, who continues to push a lot of nonsense about Gaza. But before we get that, Matt, I don't know. You probably haven't got this email because I reckon you probably weren't donating to the Kamala Harris campaign. But have you seen the news about the debt?
No, I just had an auto deduct it from my paycheck as a majority report.
Your boss made you do it.
Exactly,
Matt was
yeah.
kicking and screaming, saying, "Please don't, please don't." They force him to. It's terrible what's going on over there. No, no. But you and I have both been lucky. I think that we haven't been getting these emails, but they've been getting more and more desperate from the Kamala Harris campaign. I want to talk a little bit about like the money in politics and what this represents. But I think one thing that has become more and more disgusting about political solicitations in this country in general is how urgent they've gone. I know we've talked about in the past, how that's been used to kind of trick like old folks, people who might not have the capacity to understand what's going on, into giving tremendous amounts of money over to politicians, and this kind of stuff is equally manipulative. Kamala Harris is asking for donations after raising $1 billion $1 billion, spending the money, is now raising donations under the argument that this money might be going to be used to defend democracy and to recount votes. Now, of course, there is no argument that they have that this election hasn't been stolen from them. And as far as we know, there's no active attempt from the Kamala Harris campaign to go and challenge the results of the elections anywhere. So this is a kind of thing where you're, again, just basically asking people for more money because you fucked up. And implying that there's some grand scheme for it, instead of what it was a big scam for some people around you to make a lot of money.
I mean, this is the sort of horror of how they've treated the abortion issue, or say fascism, or the threat to democracy, as not any sort of real relation to the threat of those things, which I think is urgent. But oh, if you put this in the subject of an email, we have a 0.% higher open rate, and so let's use that. That's the level that they're thinking on.
Yeah. No, and look, I don't think it's going to be a blue Jan 6. I think that they're just doing what the Democrats do best, which is try to raise money off of catastrophes that they have caused.
It's engagement again, because Threads apparently is going crazy with that stuff. I see it sort of poo-pooed on Twitter. I mean, look, and there's always vote suppression in this country, but like
Totally.
in the aggregate, it's fairly obvious.
But again, this is. I mean, these people also attacked Jill Stein for this. When Jill Stein was raising money after her campaign in 2016, saying that they were going to push for a recount. I mean, this is effectively the same kind of thing, except at a much larger scale, because we're talking about a major American political candidate. We're not talking about $50,000. We're talking about someone trying to get $20 million to pay these debts back.
This is innovation in the modern economy. The small startups pioneer things like this, and then the big monopoly takes it over and just does it on a larger scale.
No, 100%. And like, let's get into this a little bit, because like when you look at the amount of money that was spent on this campaign, it is astronomical. And then when you look at the things they were spending it on, it will truly blow your mind. So this was probably one of my favorites. I think this is the big ass ball in Las Vegas. Well, let's hear what this guy thinks about it. Oh, never mind, I cut it out. But this is what they were spending their money on going into the campaign. Useless, horrific stuff that I know, Matt, you're just offended by the concept of in the first place.
I mean, I don't like that thing. Yeah, I think it should be turned down. But I also think, just like, look at the context of what was offered working people in, say, Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
Harris was on the playing catch up on Trump's no tax on tips policy.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't anything like, what broadly could we want to give people who work in sort of these fields? Is like, I don't know, why did Bernie win Nevada? What was he talking about, for instance? Like, in a lot of these sorts of economies where there may be seasonal jobs, or in certain like entertainment work, healthcare is kind of a surprise anxiety. So I don't know, what are we offering people besides like, oh, also we won't also not tax tips? Are you fucking kidding me?
And again, they were spending all of this money on ads, on stunts. We'll get into some of the more egregious ones in a minute. While Trump was just, getting what's called earned media, like showing up and grabbing people's attention. Which, look, Trump is kind of hard to beat. A lot of people have learned that lesson. But the Kamala Harris campaign, instead of like running and doing politics, really, a lot of this kind of stuff, like, you could be forgiven if you thought that this election was going to be a landslide for the Harris campaign on this notion alone. The way that they were running this campaign looked in many ways like they were doing a victory lap, right? And what it ended up happening is, it's like those videos you see of a guy running into the end zone and dropping the ball before they cross the goal line, right? That's literally what the Kamala Harris final week of campaigning was like.
Well, yeah, and having these giant concerts, and then pointing to Trump's admittedly flagging like enthusiasm, at least for his live turnout. It didn't turn out that way for voting, slightly in terms of turnout, but it turned out that these concerts, this is quote, there were 7 swing state concerts that involved high-priced performers. Katy Perry, I mean, Jesus, who did Katy Perry did a big thing with a problematic producer, I believe, and so great timing for her. Lady Gaga, also Russell Brand's ex, John Bon Jovi, Ricky Martin. Okay, I mean, no disrespect to Ricky Martin, but it is 2024, folks, and more, who seemingly ended up costing the Harris campaign more than $20 million on event production alone, and reportedly even more on paying the celebrities to appear. Even Oprah Winfrey charged the campaign $1 million to show up. The campaign went so far into debt that the campaign, this is probably written, is this the Free Beacon or whatever? But the campaign went so far into debt that the campaign was reportedly forced to scrap Canadian 90s indie pop star singer Alanis Morissette to save money. The pop concert campaign strategy is said to have been a brainchild of former Obama advisors on the campaign. They got to take campaign out of some of those sentences, but yeah.
Yeah, no, we'll work on their copy editing. Like, I know we played this last week, but we just got to play this again because, again, this was the strategy here.
And I think it's important to say that, anyone who has experienced or been in the United States for any period of time and experienced this country's history and knows it cannot have believed that it would be easy to elect a woman president, let alone a woman of color. Let's just be clear. And nothing that was true yesterday about how flawlessly this campaign was run is not true now. I mean, this really was an historic, flawlessly run campaign. Queen Latifah never endorses anyone. She came out and endorsed. She had every prominent celebrity voice. She had the Taylor Swiftie to the Swifties. She had the Beehive. Like, you could not have run a better campaign in that short period of time. And I think that's still true.
You absolutely could. And the fact of the matter is that they ran away from really running an actual material campaign and ran a campaign like this that, again, as we talked about last week, showed utter contempt for the American people and their intelligence, right? And now we're seeing this round 2 here, where after wasting all of that money on production for all of their celebrity guests, they're trying to get more money from people today, which, by the way, official Left Reckoning, a diagnosis here, do not give them any fucking money. Absolutely not.
No, of course not. No, I mean, only in specific cases for politician donations is like when Ilhan's being smeared or Rashida Tlaib's been smeared. That's the only politicians I'm giving money to these days.
Can we look at some of these?
Yeah.
Talk about this production. I mean, we talked about this, right, Matt? The production. The fact of the matter is, again, $1 billion, right, which is significantly more than Donald Trump.
Autumn Leaves makes a key point. She didn't have the chaperone army though. And just to highlight what that was to people is chaperone is a very buzzy, I understand. I'm not finding pop music anymore, but very buzzy pop musician. And came out and said, look, I don't want Trump to win. There are problems with the Democrats too. And people flipped out on her. And guess what? Instead of shooting the messenger, you should have maybe listened to it instead of cutting a whole bunch of checks to I guess not Alanis Morissette, but Ricky Martin and Oprah's production company.
Yeah. And giving money to this. I mean, look at this one right here. I think, we could talk about the Rogan thing a little bit more in advance, but this, they reportedly spent nearly $100,000 on just building this set for her to go on the Call Her Daddy podcast, which I think is on Barstool, something that we know only got 800,000 views. Now, in fairness, that'd be very nice for us, but for a presidential campaign to be turning down some of the things they were turning down, to be spending that much money alone, just the money on building that set, which also looks like shit. Sorry.
How much views did you say it got?
800,000.
So what they spend a dollar for 8 views?
I mean, it really is unbelievable. And again, and can you imagine that this is a particular set of folks who are really dying to come up and vote for Kamala Harris in the first place? I mean, just really kind of lazy electioneering. The kind of thing that, again, makes you feel like they were celebrating as they're running into the end zone, and completely dropped the ball here.
The thing is she ran such a heinous and insulting campaign that it is very difficult for them to point the finger at anyone but centrists. They have to gesture towards Biden's early administration because she ran on her NPR headline in the month before the election, her outreach to black men was cryptocurrency, marijuana legalization, and certain specific outreach on specific health issues that disproportionately affect black people. Maybe just Medicare for all next time.
No. That's racist, Matt. That's racist politics. We'll get into that in just a little bit.
And the thing is, that's right. I don't want to put the cart before the horse. We're going to
No,
get
but I
into
mean,
that.
it's so disgusting. I mean, I just want to do one more, and this is me. This is me just being like, what, looking at how insane this campaign was. This wasn't the big televised thing, but this was the kind of shit that they were doing for the elites here. This is the Kamala HQ in New York Fashion
We're
Week.
at this Kamala Harris Fashion Week party, and look how dystopian this is. Wait for it. Abortion rights are hard. It's this game with the laws or whatever, and you can play it. It's a real thing, and you play for no abortion pills, ban birth control, cut Medicaid, and if you fail, you fail. America is insane.
One more.
Wait. There's also, these are the cocktail.
Anyway, people can see the rest of it, but like, it's just wild when you realize how bad of a campaign they ran, knowing that event was certainly important to the staffers and the consultants and all the people working on that campaign. I mean, ever since these kind of Obama staffers in particular have gotten their hands over Democratic Party strategizing, it has been, hey, how can you get me into a room with celebrities who I want to meet? Not to mention the way that this party has been screwing over the American working class, not to mention the genocide ongoing in Gaza that this party is actively supporting, which we'll talk about more in just a little bit. There's just like this unbelievable, selfish, immature aspect to these campaigns, which are, hey, what if I can use my job working for Kamala Harris to maybe get to stand next to Beyonce? And that's really disgusting when you think about the stakes of the politics in this country.
They're aliens, and it's so crazy because it's like the whole reason the Democratic vehicle is an attractive, the Democratic Party is an attractive vehicle to those aliens, is because it should have in their back pocket people who give a shit about stuff.
Yep.
And so, like, that guy that shows up to that, of course, you're going to have people that are going to show up and be like, what the fuck is this? You may have a bunch of people that were at the DNC convention and put their hands over their ears, go tra la la past the protesters, but ultimately that's not enough. You are not going to be able to beat the fucking Republicans in this goddamn country with just those people.
And it's unbelievable. No, I mean, look, there's a certain aspect, like how much TV appearance could how much television appearances could Kamala Harris make that were going to change the game for her? Probably not many, right? Because they weren't running on anything, right? So, I don't want to sit here and make a media critique that, if only Kamala Harris had gone on this show instead of that.
Come on, Left Reckoning.
Yeah, well, that would have probably won. No, I mean, it's that is not the argument here. But the fact of the matter is that they are taking money from everyday people and doing this kind of shit on top of losing to an extremely dangerous and reactionary person like Donald Trump, right? They should have your contempt. And what's so frustrating about this, and we're going to talk about this later more in depth, but this is, just to get us all going. I want you to remember this part of the campaign when Matt and I talk about what the experience of life is for working class people in this country. I want you to think about this campaign when we talk about all of the horrible things that Donald Trump is planning on doing when he becomes president in just a few months, right? This is like, they ran a campaign that was so terrible that it alienated their base, and they were unable to be able to pick up and bring in new voters for them because they have abandoned the working class, right? And on top of all of this, they're running this big ass grift and trying to live high on the hog, and I guess to them, and now are asking people for money, and it really is the height of hubris.
Yeah, I was looking for it on audio, but I have a transcript here. Daniel Denver and Kianga Yamada Taylor had a good conversation I listened to over the weekend. But this is the key point that I was looking for. The last 2 weekends, this is Kianga Yamada Taylor. The last 2 weekends, they've been having rock concerts at downtown at the steps of the Philadelphia Museum. Kamala Harris shouting out Rocky Balboa statue that this is the city. That this is the city of under, like, what are you doing? There's a housing crisis in Philadelphia. There is a crisis of poverty in Philadelphia. There are dramatically underfunded public schools in Philadelphia, and the Democrats come rolling in with the celebrities, with the high rollers, and they have nothing to say about any of that except get out the vote.
You know, it really is unbelievable when you think about it. Like, not only is this like it's like a kind of contempt for the intelligence of of Americans, like, oh, you just put their favorite characters in front of them and they're going to love you. But two, that like don't that these things actively hurt your campaign because people resent these celebrities in this country right now. People are struggling in America, and when they see this jet set class telling them that they have to do something to ignore the fact that you feel like, oh yeah, you think the price of eggs is too high, right? Ignore that because Beyonce, people resent you for that, and they are fucking right to, right? I mean, it's just so explicit. The two middle fingers, right? And this campaign really was that to America. It was two middle fingers. It was to Arab and Palestinian people in Michigan when they brought Richie fucking Torres to do this crap, and it was to the rest of us when they were jet setting around the country, spending time with celebrities and saying, "Hey, ignore all the bad things that are happening in your life, because look, your favorite TV people are here, your favorite singers here." It really is contemptible.
Yeah, I mean, it is like they literally looked at like all the success Taylor Swift was having as like, let's just do that for a campaign.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Look, we got too much stuff we got to get to, Matt. It really is unbelievable. Sure, there'll be more litigation to come. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the messaging that we've all been receiving as Americans, the shame that we're supposed to feel. Never ever about taking these people take accountability for their actions. But before we get to that, we're going to be talking with Jeff Schuhrke about the American working class, the labor movement, and its history. Don't forget, right after all of this, after the main show, we go over the post game, patreon.com/left reckoning, get access to it. And we're going to be joined by Mike from PA. We're going to talk about many things, including a little guy named David Packman, who's had a very interesting reaction to the election. But anyways, plenty more coming. So stick around.
welcome, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. With me, as ever, David Griscom. Hello, Dave.
Hey, brother, how's it going?
It's going very well. We're pleased to be joined by Jeff Schuhrke. Jeff is the author of the recent book, Blue Collar Empire, The Untold Story of U.S. Labor's Global Anti-Communist Crusade, and also the recent In These Times piece, How Biden, Harris, and the Democrats Abandoned the Working Class. So people can tell why we invited him on our program. Jeff, thanks so much for being here. Now, let's anticipate an objection right away. We will hear that Joe Biden did, in fact, deliver for the working class relative to, say, recent presidents' administrations. What's true about that?
Well, first, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Yeah, so, there were a lot of good things that the Biden administration did for workers. I think there's no doubt about that. For example, when he came in, the first major piece of legislation was the American Rescue Plan that was passed without a single Republican vote. And it included the expanded child tax credit, which was up to $300 a month for families per child under age 6 and $250 per month for children from ages like 6 to 16 or something like that. This was like, thousands and thousands of dollars for families, but it was only for 1 year, and then it ended up not getting expanded. And that same piece of legislation included money that the administration later used to bail out the Teamsters pension fund of like $36 billion. He also He expanded overtime pay to about 4 million workers who weren't covered under the overtime rules before. He canceled about $175 million worth of $1 billion worth of student debt, but that's out of $1.6 trillion in total. Some other legislation, the infrastructure bill, the Chips and Science Act, included lots of billions of dollars in investments in job creation, and he put some very good people in his administration, his appointees, people like Lena Khan and the FTC, who did great things for consumers and capping the cost of inhalers by $35, and Jennifer Abruzzo, the general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board. He put, the most probably union-friendly NLRB appointees in there since the 1930s. And, he did, rhetorically, was very pro-union, much more than any other president, even more than FDR in terms of his, his rhetoric, being just very pro-union and support, providing that moral support through the bully pulpit. He was the first president to walk a picket line, the UAW strike. He could have used the Taft-Hartley Act to crush the recent longshoreman strike, but he chose not to do that. Although he did work with Congress to preempt the would-be railroad strike in 2022, which is a major knock against him in his pro-union record. So yeah, overall, there were a lot of really good things, but I still would argue that it was nowhere near enough when you look at the actual situation that the working class is in.
And, we'll get to that. Why do you think it was as good as it was? Do you think it, and now I'm thinking maybe it's because union support is softening, so they're realizing we actually need to do a little bit, or was it because of COVID was just such a massive upset? Like, what is your thinking of why they, for instance, put Lena Khan in?
I mean, I think there was an understanding after Trump's victory in 2016 and his ongoing popularity, the fact that Biden, it was pretty close in 2020. There was a recognition, I think, and not only that, the popularity and the success of the Bernie campaigns, both in 2016 and again in 2020, how the Democratic Party establishment very narrowly averted, Bernie becoming the nominee, which would have been their worst nightmare, because it would have been the end of the, the gravy train of all the money coming in for all the consultants and strategists and so on. So they realized through all of that, some folks in the Democratic Party establishment, and Biden himself to some extent, at least his first couple of years in office, that they needed to really step up and deliver. And I'm sure the pandemic and the economic crisis that came with the pandemic and the big COVID relief bills that had been passed while Trump was still president, which were, I mentioned the American Rescue Plan that was the first thing Biden did when he got into office, and the child tax credit. But those previous COVID relief packages under Trump also were pretty huge and extraordinary, with expanded overtime pay and, the direct stimulus checks. The American Rescue Plan had that too, but it had started under Trump. So I think there was definitely a realization, okay, we really have to do some real things here and step up. And yeah, the fact that the labor movement has been, even before Biden came in, there was like a kind of a re-energizing spirit within the labor movement. A lot of organizing strikes were already taking off. So all of that, I think, played an important role in why that he was able to, or willing to do more than I had really expected at first. But after the first couple of years, he quickly went back to the old Joe Biden that we all kind of knew and expected, I think.
And and I'm just curious, on this program, Jeff, we've been sort of saying that, like, one of the things that's kind of notable, and I think really ended up hurting, Biden and then Harris, was the fact that, like, people experienced, we could talk about how marginal it was, we could talk about how extensive it was, but improvements in their life, and then they saw that get pulled back, right? And you have to wonder if it would have been as extreme if people hadn't have seen, like the light on the other side. That like, oh, actually, like there are things that the government could be doing that could make life for working people in this country a bit easier. Do you think that played a role?
Absolutely. I think that's when we're trying to understand this, question of why didn't more working, despite of all the things I've just been talking about, why were so many working class people not willing to support Biden, or why were they so disaffected by the economy? Why was the economy such a big issue? I think we have to recognize that the COVID relief packages from 2020 and 2021 represented, I think, the largest expansion of the social safety net in this country in my lifetime, at least since the 1960s, if not since the 1930s. I mentioned all these things: expanded unemployment insurance, child tax credit, direct stimulus checks, expanded food access to SNAP benefits, continuous enrollment in Medicaid, and it goes on and on. Trillions and trillions of dollars invested directly into people, into working class people. And because of this, by the middle of 2021, the U.S. had seen the largest and fastest drop in poverty ever recorded. This is what the New York Times was even reporting in July of 2021, that the country has never cut poverty by this much in this short a period of time. So it was a really extraordinary thing, especially given that in this country, we already have always had a very meager social safety net, and it's been steadily being gutted for the last 40 years at least. And people who do qualify for benefits often have to jump through all these hoops and go through ritual humiliation. And now we had, it was showing, yes, the federal government can do things for people, real things, and it can actually eliminate poverty at any time. I mean, this is what people like, Martin Luther King were saying in the late 60s, that we can totally end poverty. There's nothing hard about it. It's just a question of do we, or does the federal government want to do it? And then for all of that to just disappear very quickly on Biden's watch, because they hit their arbitrary expiration dates. Sorry, we can't do it anymore. We're not going to. We ended poverty almost, but now we're just going to go back. And then there was a huge reversal and a huge sharp increase in poverty. And one other thing I would say about the social safety net that expanded and how it affected people's lives, and not only did it reduce poverty, but I think it emboldened a lot of working class people to start, quitting their shitty jobs and looking for other opportunities. This was, they called it the Great Resignation, because the working class didn't feel quite as afraid anymore now that there was this little tiny bit of economic security. And this is also when, in 2021, a lot of the major, union organizing campaigns were really starting to bubble up. The Starbucks Workers United campaign, and Trader Joe's workers, and the Amazon Labor Union on Staten Island, and many other places that had traditionally been non-union. They started organizing mostly low-wage workers. I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that there was this expanded social safety net. And obviously the ruling class, the top 1%, whatever you want to call it, they were not happy about this at all. This is why I think there was so much price gouging to drive up inflation, why the Federal Reserve was being pressured to raise interest rates, to inflict pain. That was the word that they were using. We need to inflict pain on borrowers, working class, middle class people, to rein in the working class that was now becoming a little bit more assertive, and then to allow this expanded social safety net to disappear. yeah,
You saw that. I'm sorry, Joe, but you saw that so clearly. You saw that so clearly, like in the middle of the Biden administration, when you saw all these kind of small business tyrants all across the country complaining about, particularly the restaurant industry, right? Because the restaurant industry, like, really does prey upon like a kind of precarity that exists in American society. And you saw all of these people all across the country going out on Twitter, these small business owners, or regional chains or something like that, complaining about how, it's time for there to be some more discipline in the labor market and how things might need to get a little tough. I mean, you saw it really, it wasn't the kind of ways that sometimes socialists, we'll talk about politics and the way that capital influences politicians as like, behind the scenes, the smoke filled room. It's like, no, these guys are like out there getting interviewed on the news saying like, hey, we need to do something about wages because, my workers are getting too uppity on me.
And nobody wants to work anymore. And all those signs that were out there. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. The nobody wants to work anymore period was the exact same period where they were folding on this child tax credit stuff. And what's so fascinating to me is, the thinking was you get a program like that in, and then it's just politically unassailable. And then I've seen some like pushback saying, well, it didn't quite get to those numbers. Well, it was popular with Democrats and like kind of unpopular with Republicans at a high point of that exact resentment of the get back to work resentment. And Joe Biden didn't fight for it. Like there was no real fight for, maybe the reason that people don't want to work anymore is because they're materially satisfied enough to be spending time with their families right now, something like that, right? But that kind of story is not one that Joe Biden is really ready to make. And so like that contradiction, they were never able to navigate it. And like we talked with Steven Sendler, they just started talking about austerity and war. And, it's really depressing. So Jeff, your book, Blue Collar Empire, we want to talk about the role that labor has in this. One of the first things that David and I thought of was the UAW contract sync for 2028 and how that looks different when it's under Kamala versus Trump, for instance. But what is the role of labor here? And then what does that 2028 contract thing, does that loom as large as it does in our imaginations?
Yeah, well, first, I think going into a second Trump administration, unions are going to be, they're always vital, but even more so in terms of playing a role in just protecting people, protecting immigrants, protecting leftists who speak out about, the genocide in Gaza, who have already been facing all kinds of repression in the workplace. And I think that's just going to intensify. And obviously, undocumented immigrants or even just any kind of racial minority who can be, labeled other is going to be facing all kinds of horrible repression. So unions have to play a role in stepping in and protecting people, making sure employers are not just going along with the Trump administration, not cooperating, and that state governments and local governments are putting up some, I hate to use the word resistance again, the sort of liberal kind of thing from the first Trump administration, but really, yeah, there has to be a kind of resistance to all the horrible things that are coming, and unions have to play an important role in doing that because, laws change as new administrations come and go, but with a union and a union contract, there's at least some measure of security there. And unions also, I think, have an important role to play in challenging, and this gets to, challenging this sort of, we've already seen it with unions calling for a ceasefire and calling for an arms embargo. And this is sort of what my book is about, the impact of U.S. imperialism and militarism out in the rest of the world and how that decimates working class movements, working class people all over the world. But it also ends up harming working class people here at home with so much of our, money that should be going into these kinds of social safety and other programs to help invest in our own communities. Instead, it's going towards militarism and war. It creates, it just kind of destroys solidarity. It lifts up these sort of hyper-patriotic nationalist kinds of ideologies that people like Trump will thrive on. And there is a history, this is what I talk about in the book, a really unfortunate, ugly history of the labor movement in the United States, or more specifically, labor officialdom, the very top leaders of the AFL-CIO and many of the unions, supporting all of U.S. imperialism and wars, because of this idea that, well, there's a stake that the U.S. working class, or at least a certain segment or strata of the U.S. working class, has a stake in that kind of stuff. So all of that has to be rejected, obviously, more so now than ever with a Trump administration, second Trump administration coming in. And so there's kind of a lot that has to happen in terms of not only organizing more workers and more workplaces, but challenging the existing union leadership in many cases. Sean Fain and the UAW came in because of a huge rank and file reform movement, and for the first time allowing members to have a direct vote in who the top union officers were. And so there has to be more of that one person or one member, one vote kinds of movements in a lot of other unions. And but anyway, back to the May 2028. It's what's really good about that is the idea of having unions coordinate with each other across different industries and sectors and try to, in this case, lining up their timelines of when their next contracts will expire so that they could be going on strike at the same time. I mean, I would caution about not putting all our eggs in that one basket and just saying, 4 years from now or 3.5 years from now, this thing's going to happen. And especially because a lot of union contracts tend to be between 3 to 5 years long. So for these to all be lined up, it needed to already have happened by now or happen very soon, because that's May 1st, 2028 is only 3.5 years from now. But I think what could be important is using that date, May 1st, 2028, and to say, like, we'll all go on whatever our contracts, or if we're in a union or not, we're all going to have some kind of mass strike action on that day or that whole week or whatever, and maybe try to articulate a shared demand or set of demands. Have some kind of political component in there as well, because that's going to be an election year, or at least presumably there'll still be elections. But to have some kind of, because if it's just about we're trying to bargain a contract at this employer and we're trying to bargain our own contract at this other employer, and it becomes a kind of scattered kind of thing. And I'm thinking really of the original May 1st, 1886, when, like, 2 years earlier, the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions, the FOTLU, which was the precursor to the AFL, they just put out a statement saying, like, we all want the 8-hour day. If we don't get it by May 1st, 1886, we all go on strike. And this was, a very unifying demand across the whole labor movement of the time. There were, anarchists, there was Knights of Labor, there was FOTLU, there were different sectors. They all said, 8-hour day, we all support that. And, it's that kind of helped bring the labor movement into focus. So having, something like that, I think, aligning contracts is still obviously a really important thing to do. And it doesn't have to just be around May 1st, 2028. A lot of, in localities, in particular cities or states, whatever, local unions across sectors and industries can be talking to each other about the same idea of aligning I think in some places they already are doing that, aligning their contracts. It doesn't necessarily have to be 2028, but at the same time, so that they can do this kind of stuff. So anyway, yeah.
On that, I think that's a really good point. And I think one thing, like, the UAW does show, like, a way of doing politics a little bit differently, because one thing I think has been really notable about Sean Fain is that he's not just saying auto workers, right? He's saying the working class. He's talking about Gaza, right? Which is something that has been lacking for a while. And I just want to ask you this as a labor historian, what are different ways that we could think about unions, like, relating to, like, the working class as a whole in this country, and, like, even internationally, right? Because, in a country where we do have such a small part of the population that is represented by a union, sometimes it can be, I'm just saying this as a socialist and somebody who's engaged in politics, A lot of times our listeners will say, we want to start, fight for the union movement. We want to fight for the labor movement. Great. But it can almost be escapist, right? Because if you're not in a union, then it's like, okay, other people are going to come in and like do something. So like, what's a different way that like, the labor movement as it exists right now can be relating to this large section of the American population that still isn't represented by a union?
That's a great question. Part of it has to do, I mean, if we're talking about politics, playing a better, stronger role in fighting for policies. Like, one of the things I wrote about in that article about how Biden and Democrats abandoned the working class was the Build Back Better Act that never happened in 2021. And how that was like an opportunity for Biden and the Democrats to try to sort of solidify the COVID era social safety net and expand it and include things like paid family and medical leave and 2 years of free community college and universal pre-K and these things that are, it's not going as far as like Medicare for all and 4 years of free college and all stuff like that. But it was something, in the right direction. And this is kind of why I say Biden abandoned the working class. He had leverage in the form, he had leverage to get that bill passed, to have Manchin and Sinema, as the two main sort of Democrats who were opposing it, to get them on board by tying the infrastructure bill, which the Manchin and Sinema really wanted to get passed. They were desperate to see it passed, and Biden could have. Originally, he was going to have the two bills linked and say to Manchin and Sinema, unless you support Build Back Better, you're not going to get the infrastructure bill. But then he immediately walked that back and surrendered it. He pressured the House Progressive Caucus to just get the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed and surrendered all that. But when that was happening, I'm sorry, this is finally getting to your question, the AFL-CIO and the American Federation of Teachers president, Randy Weingarten, they were also pressuring the House progressives to just vote for the bipartisan infrastructure bill and basically surrender the only leverage that there was to get Build Back Better done. And that's the kind of thing that like is hurting the whole working class. So, on the one hand, I would say don't do stuff like that. Like actually stand with, the socialists and progressives who are in government, and not just supporting the Democratic Party establishment, which is unfortunately what a lot of the labor officialdom tends to do. But yeah, the other thing, like you already kind of said with Sean Fain, that unions can be doing is talking about the working class as a whole, educating people, doing a lot more organizing of the unorganized. There's billions of dollars in unions' treasuries, and rather than go out and spend most of that money and really tap into the energy that's coming from workers at the grassroots who are often just trying to organize themselves without like professional organizers there to guide them through like what they need to do or what the laws are. There needs to be a lot more of that sort of top down meeting the bottom up. Because the energy is there from workers, and the popularity of unions is at the highest it's been in over 50 years. And there are
the popularity of the Democratic Party leaders is like at its lowest.
Is at its lowest,
so this is the time to be honest, because everything we've seen this past week has been all of these kind of claims against working class people and like even unions in general, right? And they note all this stuff. Oh, look how much Biden did for you. And I'll tell you all this, right? If you notice somebody is keeping a tab, expect a bill, right? And what's going on right now with a lot of these like Democratic Party officials and commentators is they want some kind of reckoning from the labor movement and for the unions because they didn't think that they showed up for them. Instead of it being the conversation like you sort of set up in your piece that the Democrats have abandoned those people.
Yeah, and it's for whatever it's worth, like 57% of union members did vote for Harris. But the other thing that when we talk about the working class in this country, there isn't a united working class, right? It's segmented, it's divided, and it's 90% disorganized, because only 10% of the working class is unionized and the rest is not. And that is sort of what happened, when it's not so much that the working class is all pro-Trump now. It's that the working class is kind of divided and not coherent, and it can get pulled in all these different directions. And certainly, white people in the working class and men in the working class might get pulled over by some of the sort of fascist, racist, misogynist arguments of Trump. But it's not like that. Those things just exist in a vacuum. It's the fact that there isn't a real political alternative that's really going to be fighting for the working class as a whole. And so unions, and this again, what gets back to sort of what I was saying about there needs to be a kind of confrontation or a reckoning within unions themselves with their leaders, traditional leaders who have been just so very tightly in line with the Democratic Party, and historically supporting U.S. empire and stuff like that, like I write about in my book, that needs to really come to an end. So it's, there's a lot that has to happen there, but there has to be this understanding of that we are a working class, and that's where solidarity can come from. It's good that there's people like Sean Fain, and we need more labor leaders at the national and local level articulating that kind of idea that it's not just about our union and our sector and our members. It's about the whole working class, and kind of defining what the working class is, recognizing that it isn't currently a coherent, unified entity, but that it needs to be, because as long as it's not, people like Trump are going to keep winning, and that the Democratic Party should get out of the way, basically, and because they're contributing to the problem of fascism by trying to siphon away or say like just support us and we'll then they don't deliver.
Next cycle will do it.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean that's the broad problem of demobilization, which I think Blue Collar Empire kind of points to a grander scope of this history. And one thing I'm curious about, as somebody who's contributed to even like union workers' understanding of our history here, we're about to enter another menacing era in this country. The state's capacity to suppress democracy in these unions, relative to the Cold War, like what do you expect going forward, or like what look out for?
Yeah, it's it's a little bit scary, this idea that we could be on the brink of like a second Red Scare. If you look at the the period of the biggest union growth was in the late 30s and 40s, with a lot of communists and other leftists within the labor movement leading that, doing a lot of the militant organizing and creating that idea of class struggle unionism, and not just a sort of bureaucratic, we're just looking out for ourselves, but this broader vision for the labor movement was being led by leftists. And then coming out of, after World War II, and the beginning of the Cold War, and this, anti-communist hysteria and McCarthyism, a lot of that was used by the right as just an excuse to crack down on unions after they had become so powerful after the New Deal in World War II, to just link unions with this like foreign menace and, say they're infiltrating and blah, 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 they're going to destroy our economy. And that was what helped get the Taft-Hartley Act passed, which organized labor is still feeling the consequences of that all these years later. And, witch hunts and union leaders, among other people in other, areas of society being forced to, testify and name names and all this type of stuff. And what happened was the CIO, which was the more, left, more progressive trade union federation that had initially welcomed in or at least tolerated a lot of communists and leftists, decided the best thing to do would just be to cut them off and, expel 11 leftist-led unions and, lead these purges and raids of the more militant progressive unions. And that really, totally crippled the CIO, shrank the CIO, and that's why it merged with the AFL a few years later to form the AFL-CIO, which was just this very strongly anti-communist body dedicated to showing the government, no, we're loyal, we're the good, we're we're not leftists in any way, shape, or form. We're totally loyal and patriotic and will support the U.S. empire and et cetera, et cetera. And I argue that had pretty devastating consequences ultimately, not only for workers around the world, but also right here at home. So with a lot of unions in the last year speaking out about the genocide in Gaza and calling for an arms embargo, and right now, actually, UAW rank and file members are calling on the union leadership to divest the union's State of Israel bonds that they have. A lot of unions have been invested in Israel for a long time. There's a push against that. We've already seen in this past year the, what's her name, Virginia Fox, extreme right-wing MAGA Republican in the House, who's the chair of the Education Committee on Education in the Workforce, is sort of like, the new Joe McCarthy. She's been doing these, calling people to come testify. It's, most high profile. It was these college university presidents about the pro-Palestine protests on their campuses and linking any support for Palestinian liberation to anti-Semitism. But Virginia Fox has also been not just targeting universities, but also targeting unions that have passed resolutions in favor of Palestine, and various, disaffected members or former members of these unions have been bringing lawsuits through the same law firms that were responsible for the Janus decision that, led to basically right to work being imposed on the whole public sector. A lot of these anti-union think tanks and law firms and politicians and lobbying groups are really getting behind this idea of any support for Palestine is anti-Semitic, and therefore it needs to be shut down and repressed. And they're increasingly using this to target unions. And Trump coming in, it's like this has been happening under Democrats, and with Trump coming in, he's promising that it's going to be even worse. So I think a lot of unions and union leaders have a choice to make. Are they going to be like what the CIO did in the late 40s and early 50s and just sort of throw the leftists under the bus and try to purge them and expel them, or and just say, we totally support U.S. foreign policy and we support Israel 100%, and we're loyal and salute the flag and that kind of thing. That's what happened before, and hopefully that's not what happens this time. Hopefully the labor movement and leaders of the labor movement will learn the lessons and say, no, we're going to stand up for what's right. We're going to oppose genocide. We're going to oppose militarism and imperialism, and we're going to fight back against all this coming repression.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff Schuhrke, the book is Blue Collar Empire, the Untold Story of U.S. Labor's Global Anti-Communist Crusade, and his recent piece in These Times, How Biden, Harris, and the Democrats Abandon the Working Class. Jeff, thanks so much for your time today, man.
Thank you.
Seriously, thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, good to have Jeff on. Blue Collar Empire. Yeah, check that book out. Very interesting history and about demobilization, not only in this country, but globally. And, you think about, say, where the last century, failed. And part of that has to do with the fact that our good old CIA and labor leaders were collaborating together.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot to learn from that moment, and it's tough sometimes to get into those things, just knowing how bleak our current moment may feel. But you absolutely need to, because those lessons are really critical that we don't fall into again. Because as we're talking about in just a little bit, some of these people that Trump's trying to put in power are extremely dangerous. But hell, I mean, you had this attempt, to attack terror supporting nonprofits today in the U.S. Congress, right? Which, by the way, what that means is people who don't want children to be killed by the Israeli government. And you had Democrats, including Colin Allred, voting for it. So really, really dangerous and worrying times. But we got a couple of stories to get to before we get to the post game. Matt, do you want to start with this? With our kind of recap on one of the main arguments that people have been making to try to avoid recognizing the responsibility and failure that the Kamala Harris campaign represented. Well, Matt, you've muted yourself, so we can't hear you. But
sorry about that. Yeah. So Eddie Glaude, a writer who found out, he wrote a book, I believe, called Democracy in Black.
He's a professor too at Princeton, isn't he?
Number of years ago, yeah, Princeton professor, was on a show, and I'm looking for it here. I've been tweeting too much, but sorry about that. Give me a second to find this tweet, and then we can get to it here. I lost it.
Okay. Do you want us to do a different segment?
Yeah. Sorry, I thought I had
Okay.
that.
All right. Well, before we get to that, then let's talk about a really, really, I think, despicable piece of news that has just come out today, and it's something that we knew about. Matt and I talked about this when it was announced. One of the fundamental failures of this Kamala Harris campaign has not been to put any level of daylight between her and Biden. Like, not even just talking about taking a humane position on this issue, really just driving home the fact that nothing fundamentally will change. And there was this really cynical attempt by the Biden administration on the issue of the genocide in Gaza to try to save face. And that is, as the international community, as the United Nations, and more people are saying there is a mass starvation event happening, particularly in North Gaza. The United States said, you know what, maybe we might consider, under certain circumstances, following American law. And America, by the way, it is against the law for the United States to provide military assistance to countries that are blocking humanitarian aid, right? Something that we've said we won't do it. Well, of course, there's an exception for everything, and Israel seems to be an exception for that. You had Blinken 30 days ago put out an ultimatum to Israel saying you have to let these food trucks into northern Gaza. Now, as we noted then, it's a pretty cynical, nasty thing in the first place to say, hey, it looks like they're not allowing food into this community. You have a month to get food into this community, knowing full well what that means for the people living in northern Gaza.
You have a month, that is right after the election, to stop starving people. I mean, transparently evil.
And even more evil, should be a surprise to no one, though. Despite 30-day Gaza aid ultimatum, the United States says support for Israel will proceed. The United States law prohibits military assistance to allies blocking humanitarian aid, but Washington says no assessment on Israel. The United States was unambiguous in a message to Israel last month: take specific steps within 30 days or face consequences. The deadline has now passed, and the United Nations is warning that famine is imminent in parts of northern Gaza, but there will be no consequences for Israel, the administration of outgoing President Joe Biden said on Tuesday. And let's just look for a second. I'm sorry to have to pull this off of. Here's what the White House is saying about this, because it's really, really disgusting here. The one thing is, like, we only have a couple more months to hear these people lie to the world and the American public. Cold comfort here when you look at what we're talking about.
And then spokesperson Alex Jones.
Yeah.
Today, there are multiple international aid agencies that say that Israel has failed to address the concerns and that the situation is even more dire than a month ago. Does the administration think that Israel has taken enough steps, or do you agree with these aid organizations and their assessment?
So a couple of things. Let me just take a look back at the last 30 days. Israel has taken steps to address the measures laid out in that letter from the two Secretaries Blinken and also Austin. And we are in a discussion with the Israelis about both the important steps Israel has taken as a result of the United States intervention, as well as
this is what is called in the business a lie. No. I mean, this is bullshit. What's going on here? The aid trucks are sitting outside. They have not allowed the food into Gaza by any meaningful metric. they are continuing this blockade and this mass starvation campaign against the people in Gaza. And I want this to be clear for a few reasons. One, to realize how the American government lies to the people like this, right? This is even not just like, oh, this is breaking moral law or international law, whatever, those kind of squishy things. No, this is American law. And they are refusing to play ball. Now, of course, we're going to see a Trump administration that is going to do the exact same thing. But when you try to hold this over somebody's head, it falls flat, because as you're seeing right now, it is the Biden administration that is willingly participating in the starvation of Palestinian people. And just really to like put some focus on this, I wanted to share this. Jeremy Scahill shared it. This is from Drop Site, which y'all should be following and supporting. One of their correspondents who is in Gaza. This is their on-the-ground report of what their experience is right now. As infested flour becomes a staple, State Department still assessing Israel's aid restriction to Gaza. This is the most difficult period I have endured since Israel's genocidal war on Gaza began last year. Everyone is so hungry. Over the past week, my family and I have resorted to eating canned pet food mixed with poor quality rice that feels like chewing plastic. We live in Deir al-Balah, and like everywhere else in Gaza, there is nothing to buy in the markets. We typically eat one meal a day, usually some canned food along with olive oil and za'atar. To bake bread, we have to use bug-infested flour. Some days when we are unable to find anything else, we are forced to pay absurd prices for vegetables that are rotten. I have severe stomach pains. I would rather fast than eat this. I dream of food every day. I imagine our fridge full of meat, lettuce, milk, and cheese. I sometimes talk to myself at night when I'm hungry and have nothing to eat. That's what the on-the-ground reality is. And that's what these liars in the Joe Biden and Kamala Harris administration are doing right now, is coming out and continuing to misinform the American public about what the on-the-ground situation is, and to say we're having conversations with Israel where we're praising them for all the great work that they're doing. It's disgusting.
I mean, they're intentionally starving people. Yeah.
And look, and it's just like, there's a lot of our focus is on like the election and stuff. But this is a fundamental reality that people knew in this country about what the Kamala Harris administration has been with Biden and what it would represent in the future, right? And the fact of the matter is that the genocide is happening under their watch, right? So all of this kind of glee from liberals who are saying, well, all these Palestinians and Arabs are going to learn their lesson for not supporting Kamala. What are they getting right now for this? What have they gotten? They have gotten the most horrific chapter in recent memory in Gaza.
It's also not true. There's no way history is going to look back at, say, the voters who said, I voted for AOC in the Bronx, but I didn't vote for Kamala Harris because we wanted to punish, which is a large percentage of people. History's not going to look back at those people with the raised eyebrow. It is going to be looking at the people who were like, obviously we're the better guys while conducting a genocide. And it turned out it doesn't fucking work.
Their fucking legacy is so unbelievable. The genocide, the mass slaughter of children, the images of, mothers holding their dead kids and crying and saying, I wasn't able to feed my child breakfast, just like this stuff that tears at your heart. And on top of that, 4 years where they basically said to Trump, hey, why don't you take 4 years, take a moment, relax, spend some time in Mar-a-Lago, get your boys together, come up with a plan so you can come and take the keys back and complete your movement. I mean, this is the legacy of the Biden Kamala administration right here.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice of you to call it the Kamala administration now. I think now that she's lost the
we don't have to do that anymore.
The presidency, no one's going to remember her. Like, it's like Dukakis. What was his deal?
Oh, man. Well, let's get you. Are you ready with this bit here?
Yeah. So Eddie Glaude was on MSNBC, and him and Stephanie Ruhle got into it about material conditions and the heart of America. And I'll just remind people, Stephanie Ruhle, the anchor, former Deutsche Bank banker. So, that's where she's coming from when she tries to get Glaude here to say maybe material conditions have something to do with this.
There's this sense, right, that whiteness, right, is under threat. The demographic shifts. The country isn't what all of these racially ambiguous children on Cheerios commercials are confusing the hell out of me.
Right? Eddie, a lot of people voted because their life's too damn expensive. And it was here and it
They
was
voted for, you're telling me, Stephanie, that all of these people who believe that their lives are, that bread is too high and eggs are too high, that they voted for a convicted felon, a guy who said we can grab the pea.
I think that a lot
They
of people,
voted for this
listen,
guy.
I'm not defending it. But I think there are tons of people that don't pay attention to, and I'm not defending it, don't pay attention to politics at all. But while we live in the most prosperous country in the world, people are saying, life's not fair, I'm not doing well, my son's still living in the basement, I can't seem to get a job, I don't like the status quo, I'm voting for something else, and he was
I
the person.
love you to life,
I love you.
but I do not believe that. I cannot believe that. And the reason I think you believe it is because you don't want to believe that that's what's really motivating them.
That's where we have a real big fucking problem, I will say. Sorry, Eddie Glaude. When you insinuate that the people that are pointing to material conditions are doing it because they're insensitive to racism, go fuck yourself back to Princeton. I'm sorry. That is heinous at this point in time to be pointing, because guess what? I mean, I don't know how we have to explain this to Princeton professors, but the Democratic base traditionally, before this last election, I mean, was lower income. Who's more sensitive to the cost of living crisis we're fucking talking about? So the message, the economy sucks, is different for different constituencies. You had Kamala Harris, like we said, running out there with Ricky Martin and Oprah saying, Mark Cuban's opportunity economy, get in where you fit in.
Yeah, figure out how to get some crypto so you can, ride the next wave.
I mean, unbelievable. And it's like the thing that I don't get here, because like Eddie, nice guy in terms of like the off-air time of getting him hooked up to do a Majority Report interview, had him on for his book Democracy in Black. Your whole bit, the whole like focus is Democracy in Black. I believe that's maybe I'm misremembering the book's name, but anyway, this idea that there is a sort of definite dark heart at the core of America here. And then at the same time, like, why are you the one surprised and telling people to slow down and deal with it? Like, I saw Nicole Hannah-Jones, I think that's her name, say like, if you pass over Kamala, that's a massive insult to your voters. And then also after Kamala loses, saying, of course, this country wouldn't elect a black person. And it's like, which way is this here?
Yeah.
Why is and Sonny Hostin too saying like, look, everyone wants to do recriminations on the Democrat, but can't we sit down and think about why people voted for a felon? No one cares. No one cares about none of that shit, Sonny. People are worried about their goddamn rent. Like, and it's like, no, like, and you know what? The people who need to like slow down and all of a sudden, oh wow, the Republicans can turn out voters. This has happened. This happened with Nixon in 1968. Actually, Nixon, when he ran for Senate in California, it was, how could this uncouth guy, it happened with Reagan. It happened with Reagan. The Bedtime for Bobo, the actor who's in the Westerns, how could this country do this? It happened with George Bush, the fail son.
Oh, like, you don't have a beer with him? Yeah.
It happened with Donald Trump the first time. And so, yes. And you know what? This was a heinous campaign he ran. J.D. Vance is despicable. In 2016, it came out that one of the most heinous like clips that I could think of, the hot mic where he says, I moved on her like a bitch, grab him by the pussy. That came out. And this country elected him. So I am not surprised that there is a certain appetite for that here. That's why there is an urgency for this Democratic Party to not take people for fucking granted when they have bills staring them in the face and telling them, hey, maybe some crypto. Hey, maybe in certain municipalities you can get a tax grant for a first-time family. What the fuck are we talking about? And it's just like the massive gap. The ad that all the sort of APAC people are pointing to, like, say we need to throw trans people under the bus. She's for they, them, he's for you. The problem with that is that there was nothing for you. There was no wider thing. And what Trump was offering was heinous. It was, we're going to get the criminal migrants out who are very scary, and that's going to make your job pay better. And there was nothing to counter that from the Democratic side. No, like, and it's like they want to give trans health care or abortion, like, right? It's like, let's protect abortion rights. Abortion rights are going down the fucking drain because of your complacency. So we need to be giving people something. People will only turn, a certain number of people will turn out to protect abortion rights. They did. Congratulations. You got more votes than Hillary Clinton. Great. You need to be giving people someone, which Joe Biden fucking failed to follow through most of it, but at least there was stuff there. I mean, there was a public option. At least when in 2020, they're saying, like, what about this trans criminal healthcare reassignment? It's like, bro, how about public option? What the fuck are you talking about? All that stuff was removed. And so there was, like, Bobby Kennedy's Make America Healthy extravaganza was the main policy on healthcare besides staying where we were with Obamacare.
And on migration, it was just that, hey, by the way, Trump is right about everything he's saying about immigration to this country. We just think that he's not going to be as good as he says he's going to be.
He's not sincere. He's not actually sincere. He just wants a campaign issue. And now it's like, well, look, you should have known that he was going to actually come for your families. Your whole thing was he's not sincere and just wants a campaign issue on it.
Yeah. No, and like, and again, you know, to where like the migration stuff is mobilizing to gettable people, right? Not talking about the freaks, the Stephen Miller acolytes, like the people who really do want to see folks suffer. It's from this really cynical move that the Republicans do, and it's really evil and twisted. Don't get me wrong, but it's this idea that, look, the reason that you don't get protected, the reason that you feel you are one accident at work away from living out on the street, you are one accident, from not being able to provide food for your family, is because the United States government is giving all of its money to migrants, all this kind of stuff. It's not true, but it is something that is viscerally felt because people think that it's insane in this country that, yeah, we don't have healthcare, that, yeah, if something bad happens to you, you will be forgotten. And the right has figured out how to play that perfectly, because what the right does is like, yeah, you're never going to get that, by the way, in this country. But you know what? There's a group of people who is getting that, and we need to wage a war against them. And that's effectively the really cynical move that the right does. Now, it's cynical and it's stupid and it's weak. And all you have to do, as Matt was saying, is actually run on saying, hey, yeah, it is crazy in this country that people suffer in the way that they do, that working people can spend the vast majority of their lives at work, and yet they are one bad moment away from financial ruin, not just for them, but for their entire family. And if something bad happens to you, we don't think that we should throw people out on the street so that your landlord, doesn't have any interruption in their rent, in their rent payments that they're getting from you. No, we'll create more protections for renters and for people in this country, right? All of these things you can pivot on and you can beat them on. But instead, what we get every 4 years is exactly what was in that clip, and it's retro, right? In a way, right? That's unique to this election, but it's the same thing after 2016. It was the same thing in previous elections, where instead of listening to all these people who are saying, we are drowning, please get us out of the water, right? It is this big wag of the finger from these well-off people in media who say, you don't actually understand the problems and you're actually racist and bigoted and whatever else is going to fit this narrative this election.
The funny thing is, Eddie was in 2016 arguing that black people should withhold their vote from Hillary Clinton. I believe, maybe I'm getting this wrong, but I'm pretty sure this was right, for specific reparative policy toward the black community. Wow. And that he did that because he was not expecting Trump to win. And when Trump won, it was a little bit of a problem, I think. And but the thing is like all this focus on like the white person who is just motivated for whiteness or whatever, the bigger problem that is more embarrassing and why this is a feeble, frankly, attempt by Glaude and a lot of these people is that the margins weren't just white people. In fact, like white people were basically the same. It's margins in other communities that were lost. And it's not just them saying, oh, it's a woman, I'm going to vote for the Republican this time. It's, what am I voting for again? Why am I turning out? So Malika Jabali was on Iman's show on MSNBC. I hope she gets invited back. Here's her outlining that point, and it's like how the ability, the willingness to confront why people stayed home is just not there right now.
Well, I think first we have to identify what we mean by working class. And I think a big problem is that we tend to treat the working class as a monolith. So yes, he's winning over some conservatives who might have flipped over from Obama to Trump in 2016. But if you look at this election, Kamala Harris actually did better with voters of color who did not have a college degree. She had 62% to Donald Trump's 38%. So when we treat the working class as synonymous with white people, we're ignoring a lot of what's happening with what I call slide voters. These are people who are opting out of the electoral process altogether. These are non-voters, people who decide that the Republican Party is not a political home for them, even with their frustration. Black women, Black men, Latino women, these are CNAs, these are Lyft drivers, these are warehouse workers who do not actually find a home with Donald Trump and are not drawn to him. So instead of swinging back and forth, I say that they're sliding out. They are checking out of the process. 15 million people stayed home. So I don't think we should overstate Donald Trump's appeal with the working class because it's not a monolith. And then what happens is when you have somebody like Kamala Harris, like Maurice said, who represents a party that is capitalist, just like the Republican Party is a capitalist party. They benefit from billionaire donors. So what they rely on, since their policies aren't fundamentally going to address the needs of the working class, they have to rely on certain messaging. And if Kamala Harris has mixed messages where she's starting off with this populism, but doesn't even say the word working class, I rarely heard her say that phrase, if ever. She had an economic speech in Philadelphia, or excuse me, in Pennsylvania, not long after the debate. And I think what was happening is that she was working on the defense because Trump called her a capitalist. So she has to then say, you know what? I am a capitalist. Did not say anything about Medicare for all. Did not say anything about a $15 minimum wage, things that were tentpole issues for Bernie Sanders. So the way that they get those people back, I think looking at non-voters who are drawn to things like a $15 minimum wage and don't believe that populism requires racism.
And I think Malika is one of the best in the business. It also doesn't take one of the best in the business to know that. Yeah. Everyone knows that about the quote unquote swing voter. It's not the person like, what's his name in the red sweater in 2020 that was like
something Bone. Yeah, Tim Bone.
Yeah, Ken Bone.
Ken Bone.
It's not Ken Bone who's legitimately like wavering and just a fan of both of them. It's people that definitely slide one way or the other and are deciding if it's worth their fucking time to go turn out to vote. And it's like, and it's crazy because like at their best, liberals understand the thing that like, hey, if you close a polling place in a certain type of neighborhood, that's going to cause a huge or a percentage of votes to shut down. And it's like, we don't understand why running on Mark Cuban's shit and
voter suppressant
and there being Gaza genocide going on, that is like, no, it's probably actually, if you look at the exit polls, they said it was the economy. So clearly Gaza does have nothing to do with it. Like, okay, man, sure. Tell yourself that.
I think that's a perfect way to end it. So we're going to go over, well, actually, before we go over, Matt, because we ran over a little bit, we'll have more opportunity to talk about it a little bit in the post game. But, 2 minutes before we run, I mean, all of these Trump appointments that we've seen, we'll have more chances to sort of look at them. I mean, is it worrying? I think yes. Is it surprising that it looks like it's going to be more of the kind of neocon establishment figures, running the show?
It's mildly interesting that they're not even head faking towards a Dave Smith style libertarian foreign policy. They're like, no, actually, I'm bored of that. Don Jr.'s like desperately texting his dad saying, hey, no, not that guy. And Trump's like, I don't know. Marco's fine. He we're working together on some deals.
I can't believe he would do it again. I can't believe Donald Trump would say one thing and do another.
Fair enough to a Michael Tracy, who I think has actually been covering that beat fairly well. Unlike some others who I think are maybe a little bit too charitable. But
well, folks, we're going to jump over the post game. I won't make the pitch too long, but here's what we're going to get in the post game. We're going to be joined by Mike from PA. We're going to talk a little bit more about what happened with this election. We're going to talk also about David Pakman, somebody who is just really the poster child of being epically wrong about politics, whether it is supporting the mass slaughter of children in Gaza, supporting the coup in Bolivia, or putting his head in the sand about what just happened last Tuesday. It'll be fun to chat with Mike from PA about that. We also, this weekend, are going to be having a bonus episode for patrons only, patreon.com/leftreckoning, to get access to it with our good friends, Jose Luis and Kurt Hackbarth. Y'all know them from Soberania, the great Mexico podcast that is in English. We're going to be talking about some of the lessons that the U.S. left can learn from Mexico, because, we haven't even really touched on the misogyny thing yet, Matt. That whole fantasy that the reason that Kamala Harris lost was because a woman could never be the president of the United States. We're going to talk about, some lessons from down south in Mexico, where it turns out if you show up for working class voters and have their respect and support, not only can you win, you can win by massive margins and reshape the country. So you won't want to miss that.
And the judiciary.
Yeah, which is a real necessity now. There's not really any other path forward for folks. So you're not going to want to miss any of that, folks. Join us over at patreon.com/leftreckoning and get access. We appreciate all of y'all so much. Got a lot of really big shows coming up in the next few weeks. So appreciate you. And yeah, come and see us in the postgame.